shown to induce an immune response, and that's something you'd like to see. But it hasn't been tried in terms of does it prevent infection, and that's going to be key. It hasn't been tested in terms of safety. So we have a long way to go, and during that long way to go, we need to be focused on the public health response here in America to get this under control.
So what do we need to do now, Doctor, to get this under control? Clearly, it's by no means under control.
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest challenges we're seeing right now, Wolf, is the politicization of this, the injection of politics into a public health response. Never in my career at CDC did I see things happening in this way. And when you have every public health leader in the nation talking about what we need to do to control this virus, wearing masks, social distancing, washing hands, making sure that everyone has the resources to take care of themselves. And then you hear politicians, some of whom saying, don't listen to CDC, don't listen to state and local public health officials. It's a recipe for disaster, and it's a recipe for people losing their lives.
You joined 3 other former heads of the CDC to write in the Washington Post an article responding to the recent attacks on public health experts. Among other things, you write this: trying to fight this pandemic while subverting scientific expertise is like fighting blindfolded. Do you have any hope that the president, the White House will reverse course and really start listening to the experts and let all the experts, including Dr. Fauci, speak directly on a daily basis to the American public?
Well, I am by nature a hopeful person. And I know that if we take that approach, if we let public health lead here, if we unify and have this be the American way, that we're all looking out for each other, we can see the same kind of impact that they're seeing in Europe, that they're seeing in so many Asian countries, where they're getting this under control and they're using public health as the roadmap to opening the economy. That's what we need to do. But we need the federal government to step up and make sure the supports are there so that lower income Americans have what they need, so that essential workers are protected. And if we want to get our schools open, Wolf, we can't even think about doing that until we have this under control in the community.
Yeah, Dr. Fauci said today at Georgetown University, this is a pandemic of historic proportions. Yesterday he said we haven't even begun to see the end of it yet. And the current CDC director said today that the fall and winter of 2020 and 2021 are going to be probably one of the most difficult times that we've experienced in American public health. Do you see the administration right now taking the national steps that are needed to prepare for this?
Well, I think Dr. Redfield is right that this will be a challenging winter, because we'll be facing not only COVID, but we'll have flu going on at the same time, and those can look a lot alike. I think that we need to come together, and I hope that the threat of what might happen this winter if we don't will motivate people to see that there are things we can do. There are things that we can do to ensure that Black Americans, Latino Americans, low-income Americans don't continue to get devastated by this. Things we can do so that every child in America can get back to school. That's what we need to do, Wolf.
Yeah, we certainly do. Dr. Besser, as usual, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for everything you are doing.
Used the Rose Garden to be able to get a substitute for these rallies.
Yeah, he also used the Rose Garden as a backdrop for an interview with CBS. Former colleague here, Catherine Herridge.
Life-saving lessons. We're talking masks next.
He said something similar to that before, but this raised a little eyebrows after that interview. Take a listen.
Why are African Americans still dying at the hands of law enforcement in this country?
And so are white people. So are white people. What a terrible question to ask. So are white people. More white people, by the way. More white people.
Amy, what about that?
Well, it's actually not the case. As a percent of their population, African Americans are killed more often or injured or arrested, pulled over than white Americans. So factually, that's incorrect.
That's about 3 times.
Also, yeah, and when you listen to what swing voters are saying, I've been talking to a lot of consultants, especially those who are doing work in suburban areas. What they'll tell you is the support that suburban voters have for the Black Lives Matter movement has increased substantially since 2016. They also are not interested in protecting the Confederate flag or Confederate monuments. Now, they do take a line, they do draw a line at some things that they feel like are going too far.
Right.
But those are two things that the president should not want to get in a battle over with suburban voters.
But Ben, I only have 30 seconds. That whole effort about statues or flags, and he calls it a matter of free speech, is it powerful politically?
Well, I think the president here, is speaking, I assume, in total numbers and not in percent or per capita. But when it comes to the Confederate side of things, I think the president has a knee-jerk reaction that whenever you put something like that in front of him that he feels smells of political correctness, he's going to push back against it. He believes that that helps him with his base.
All right, panel, a little different today. Thank you very much. A big shakeup tonight among mainstream media over political censorship. New York Times opinion section editor Bari Weiss is leaving, and she is not going quietly. Fox News media analyst and host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, shows us tonight. Good evening, Howie.
Good evening, Brett. In a scathing resignation letter, Bari Weiss, an opinion editor at the New York Times, says she's been constantly bullied by her own colleagues. They've called me a Nazi and a racist. Some, she says, publicly smear me as a liar and a bigot on Twitter. With no fear that harassing me will be met with appropriate action, they never are. This environment yields what Weiss calls self-censorship. Why edit something challenging to our readers when we can assure ourselves of job security and clicks by publishing our 4,000th op-ed arguing that Donald Trump is a unique danger to the country and the world. And the departure gets personal. Weiss complains in the note to publisher A.G. Sulzberger that he and other executives did nothing while privately praising her as courageous, and that some friendly colleagues see a new McCarthyism there. Weiss, a former Wall Street Journal opinion editor, is a controversial writer and self-described centrist who has made some errors, but also complained about being pilloried by the social media mob.
Saying that I am offended is a way of making someone radioactive. It's a way of smearing their reputation.
Weiss was critical when Sulzberger ousted editorial page editor James Bennett for publishing that column by Republican Senator Tom Cotton on urban riots, but only after a backlash led by African-American staffers. The acting opinion editor promised today the Times will keep publishing voices, experiences, and viewpoints from across the political spectrum. But Weiss writes that pieces not explicitly promoting progressive causes run only after every line is carefully massaged, negotiated, and caveated. Bari Weiss says Twitter is the ultimate editor for the New York Times, but her words, her harsh words, speak to a media culture far beyond the time.
Before they start. Get TheraWorks Relief today. Available in stores everywhere.
Better.
President Trump wore a mask, and none of us will be able to see it because we'll still be in lockdown.
Wow. Only 4 months too late. What's he going to do next? Drag his Christmas tree out to the curb?
Late night host talking about President Trump, who wore a mask for the first time in public after months of refusing to do so. Tonight, a new poll shows a deep gender divide when it comes to wearing a mask. 54% of women report always wearing a mask in public, compared to only 34% of men. Come on, boys. The science is clear. Wearing a mask works. And Bill Nye, the Science Guy, went on TikTok, of all places, to help explain why some face coverings work better than others.
It can block the movement of hair, but only to a certain extent. This is a homemade face mask. It has just 2 layers of cloth with a pipe cleaner sewn in to help it fit against the bridge of your nose. And it blocks the movement of air very effectively.
Joining me now, our very special guest, Bill Nye, the Science Guy, host of the Science Rules podcast. Bill, this makes no sense to me. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's common sense. Why did you feel that you needed to make a TikTok video? You're not making one for seatbelts, bike helmets, or condoms. I'm glad you're not.
I have done actually a bicycle safety video, and I have done a seatbelt video. This is back in the 20th century, but now we have this extraordinary problem where everybody's personal action affects everybody else. That's the nature of these medical masks. Now, the thing is, people have this perception that it's a personal choice, that it's a matter of personal freedom. I could disagree more, but I don't see how. In other words, we've all agreed that you're not allowed to blow secondhand cigarette smoke into other people's faces or workplaces or restaurant areas. And so in the same way, I think we should agree that we're not allowed to blow potentially coronaviral particles into other people's faces or workplaces or spaces. Now, this is not an extraordinary idea. It just may seem a little bit uncomfortable, but so is, not to be, it just, when you get very sick with this, it's very troublesome and very uncomfortable. And it's hard not to get, if I may, arms akimbo about this, because it seems, to your point, like common sense. Like, why wouldn't everybody do it? But it's this perception that we have rights that are not taking into account other people's rights. It's selfish. It's weird.
You're the science guy, so that's why I'm turning to you. But I want to ask you about other voices of influence that have huge platforms. Fox News host Tucker Carlson said there is no evidence that masks help slow the spread of the coronavirus. I'd like you to watch this.
This is what happens when science intersects with politics. Both lose, and the country loses most of all. Keeping kids out of school, keeping the elderly inside, forcing everyone to wear a mask when there's no evidence that helps.
No evidence that helps. That message, those words are making their way to millions of homes every night of the week. What's your reaction?
Well, you know, Mr. Carlson and I have butted heads a few times. I could disagree with him more, but I don't see how. And as far as his extraordinary claim that science and politics have nothing to do with each other, in the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, it refers to the progress of science and useful arts. And I remind everybody that the understanding of viral particles and the shape of the coronavirus, which has this crown of thorns on it, is a result of electron microscopy, which you would not have without science. Vaccines are a couple century old technology that's very well understood. And masks work. His extraordinary claim that they don't work, I don't think is based on facts. I think it's him just telling people what they might want to hear, his audience might want to hear. But my question always, if you want to talk about Mr. Carlson, is what does he want for the future? What do his 4 children want for the future? Do they want a future where everybody's allowed to run stop signs and go through red lights? And I'm not being silly. I'm just saying, are we going to have rules to protect each other or not? It's really a kind of weird claim that he made.
Well, for his children, for mine, for all children, I certainly hope we all want the future to be better, smarter, and stronger. Bill, always great to see you. I appreciate you sharing some of your expertise with us this evening. Thank you so much for watching. That does it for me. My dear friend and colleague, Steve Kornacki, picks up coverage right on the other side of the break.
A very different one. It is a virus here at home, and the country is indeed in the grip of a fear spiral. Some families afraid to leave their homes, others afraid to hug their own relatives. Whether this fear is fully justified is really a question that may only be known in historical hindsight ultimately. But at the moment, it is clear to say that in many ways it is dictating American life and putting into question our natural bent towards resilience and the things that make us who we are. Our school systems, our economy, our work life in the office, even our favorite pastimes are now in question for this fall. But for an overwhelming majority of parents say they are concerned about sending their kids back to school. And they feel, as you look at the numbers there, many of them, that is not a risk worth taking. Let's look at some other numbers to inform this in a bigger way. According to the CDC, 30 children in America have died from COVID-19, 30 too many to be sure. To put it in a larger context, in a typical year, 190 children in America die from the flu. 436 take their own lives.
Record of telling the truth, I would say that's the safest bet.
Okay, this is not even a thinly veiled swipe at the President of the United States, who essentially just held a campaign rally in the Rose Garden for an hour, barely mentioning coronavirus. Fauci says trust the medical experts who have a track record of truth. Okay, he didn't just randomly say those words. He isn't talking about people generally. He's talking about someone specifically. He's talking specifically about the person who has been peddling false statements.
Well, I think we are in a good place.
We're facing a serious problem now.
And we're almost up to 40 million in testing and 40 million people, which is unheard of.
I think what we do need is better screening, broader screening in the country to get a feel for really what the penetrance of this infection is.
If you look at the chart of deaths, deaths are way down.
It's a false narrative to take comfort in a lower rate of death. So we were able to close our country, save millions of lives, open, and now the trajectory is great. Some states who went from shutdown to complete throwing caution to the wind.
Okay, so there's the person making false statements and the truth teller. And now the American people are making their own decision on who to trust. Let's take what President Trump said today on schools.
What do you tell parents and teachers who feel that it's unsafe to go back?
I would tell parents and teachers that you should find yourself a new person, whoever's in charge of that decision, because it's a terrible decision. Because children and parents are dying from that trauma too. They're dying because they can't do what they're doing. Mothers can't go to work because all of a sudden they have to stay home and watch their child, and fathers.
Trump wants kids back to school. And in fact, he's gone so far as to threaten to withhold funds from districts that don't open up. But he hasn't offered to help make the changes required for this to happen safely. Zero action, a lot of talk. And Americans right now don't believe him. 71% of parents in a new poll say it's moderately to highly risky to send their kids back to school. This includes 53% of Republicans. Major school districts also saying no deal. North Carolina and the nation's largest school district here in New York City will split time between in-person and online learning this fall. In Los Angeles, classes online. Americans also don't believe what Trump is selling when it comes to reopening our economy.
We're working to safely and responsibly reopen our country. We're safely reopening our country. Our country is now in the next stage of the battle. A very safe, phased, and gradual reopening.
Except the next stage in 27 states is a step back, halting reopening or going back into lockdown. And tonight, even Trump's closest allies don't believe what he has been saying for months when it comes to testing.
We have the best and certainly the biggest, by far the biggest testing program anywhere in the world. Our testing is far superior to anybody's. Where you have great testing, the best in the world.
Well, it's not true, and now Florida's governor, Ron DeSantis, close ally of the president, and Lindsey Graham, another close ally of the president, beg to differ. They say the administration must do better.
We just don't have enough testing in real time for the population as a whole.
We also understand there's a need for faster results. They are backed up.
Okay, they are backed up. It can take a week to get results, which, as we all know, renders them useless. Even Trump's own former chief of staff wrote about how unacceptable it is. So there's all of that. And then finally, masks. Just about everyone has stopped believing President Trump's example of not wearing one. 24 states and Washington, D.C. now require people to wear masks in public. Even the people Trump considers his allies, corporate America, are now saying and stepping up where Trump's federal government has been painfully silent. Best Buy today requiring all customers wear masks. And the CEO of the largest retailer in America, Walmart, a man Trump has tried hard to win over, now saying a mandate requiring all customers to wear masks inside Walmart is on his mind. At a time when 37 states are seeing an increase in cases, and the number of deaths in this country has topped 136,000 people. This country needs someone to lead and someone we can trust. Not somebody who keeps saying false things, at best to make people feel better, or at worst to hide the truth and help his own re-election. And that is why Fauci is not being nuanced or vague anymore.
I would stick with respected medical authorities who have a track record of telling the truth. I would say that's the safest bet.
You can see by how he tightens his lips and his jaw about how he feels. Caitlin Collins is out front live outside the White House.
Not require face masks at the polls and did not expand mail-in voting. In Alabama, former U.S. Attorney General Jeff
Meet passengers at New York airports. Those coming from 22 states designated as COVID hotspots now need to fill out these forms from the health department, providing contact information, or face a $2,000 fine. The state had already imposed a 2-week quarantine for those travelers, like Elle Hathaway of California, who's returning to Syracuse University next month.
They're trying to figure out a way to work with the governor and figure out like a safe, effective way, because realistically they know kids are not going to be able to come back like 2 weeks early.
But with tens of thousands of people traveling here every day, can this actually be enforced? Last month, Governor Cuomo announced up to a $10,000 fine if a person entered the state without quarantining and spread the virus. So far, no fines have been issued in New York City. Months ago, Texas imposed its own 14-day quarantine for travelers from the Northeast, but today, Texas officials told NBC News they did not cite anyone, just conducted random spot checks.
Just by the sheer number of people that we would need to enforce this around the clock, 24/7, we just don't have that type of staffing.
Still, after 3 people returned to Warren County, New York from a vacation in Florida and tested positive, 46 residents are now on lockdown and being monitored.
We have 8 active cases of the coronavirus. If we had 200 active cases, it gets a whole lot harder and a whole lot more labor intensive.
The governor's office says travelers driving from hotspots must fill out the form online. Again, it's not clear how that will be enforced. Lester?
All right, Gabe, thank you. President Trump plunged back into the issue of police killings of black Americans today, and also weighing in on the issue of the Confederate flag. The president making controversial comments about both. And Jeff Bennett has late details for us.
In a new interview with CBS News, President Trump called the killing of George Floyd by police terrible, but hit back when asked about the underlying issue of deadly use of force by police.
Why are African Americans still dying at the hands of law enforcement in this country?
And so are white people. So are white people. What a terrible question to ask. So are white people. More white people, by the way. More white people.
The president also defending the display of the Confederate flag.
You understand why the flag is a painful symbol for many people, because it's a reminder of slavery.
Well, people love it, and I know people that like the Confederate flag and they're not thinking about slavery. I just think it's freedom of speech, whether it's Confederate flags or Black Lives Matter or anything else you want to talk about. It's freedom of speech.
Those comments coming as the president faces fresh fallout over his coronavirus response in the form of an extraordinary rebuke from 4 former heads of the CDC, who argue in a new op-ed published in the Washington Post that the president and White House officials are attempting to undermine the agency's guidance for schools hoping to reopen in the fall. The condemnation from Drs. Tom Frieden, Jeffrey Copeland, David Satcher, and Richard Besser comes as President Trump blasted the CDC's school reopening guidelines as very tough and expensive.
For guidelines to be issued by CDC and then undermined by the White House confuses everyone. The CDC guidelines are based in science. If we can't rely on that, where are we going to turn?
A White House official tells us in response that it's been working with the CDC in partnership since the very beginning of this pandemic. And they say they encourage all Americans to follow CDC guidelines. Lester?
Jeff Bennett at the White House tonight. Thanks. A late development this evening. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been hospitalized for treatment of a possible infection. The 87-year-old justice underwent a procedure to clean out a bile duct stent that was placed last August. The court says she will stay in the hospital for a few days to receive IV antibiotic treatment. A federal judge today denied bail for Ghislaine Maxwell, the former girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein.
Now, people may say that's because of the lockdowns, but the problem all along here, Martha, has been, and what has fed this fear is, there's been no real effort on the part of the so-called experts to balance the dangers of coronavirus to the dangers of lockdown and the other measures that have been taken. And you know, people may want to blame Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx for that, but they're epidemiologists. Their concern and preoccupation professionally is fighting this disease. But fighting the disease has collateral effects, as we've seen in the economy, in the lives of children, in the lives of families, in the lives of workers who can't go to work because they got to stay home and tend to their kids. So what we're desperately in need of here is balance. And not only balance in the way we look at this, but balance in the way we look at the data that we see, which suggests strongly that children are only minimally affected by this disease, and the data that suggests that they're going to spread it to all the teachers is very weak indeed. And in country after country overseas, where schools have been reopened, it simply hasn't happened.
So you heard Simone Sanders, understandably criticizing the president in her role as a senior advisor to the former Vice President Biden. Here he is doing more of that as well today. Let's play that and we'll get your thoughts on it on the other side.
Mr. President, open everything now isn't a strategy for success. It's barely a slogan. Quit pushing the false choice between protecting our health and protecting our economy. All it does is endanger our recovery on both fronts.
So how vulnerable is the president on his handling of this virus with 4-something months to go, Brett?
Well, anytime you have a spreading disease, regardless of the details of it, it's not going to be helpful to whoever's in charge of the government. That's true at the local level, one presumes, at the state level, and at the federal level. So that, make no mistake about it, this coronavirus has hurt Donald Trump's standing, not least because it's damaged what he insists on telling us is the greatest economy ever that we had before it hit, but also because it persists.
Yeah.
So sure, it's a real problem for him. But you heard Simone Sanders say, well, where's the president's plan? Well, I'm not sure we heard a plan from Joe Biden about how to reopen either. He's got his plan on the economy and a number of other things, but I haven't heard his reopening plan yet. So, it remains to be seen whether he'll ever have one.
Won't take the actions that we can take today to reduce the spread.
All right, Dr. Tom Frieden, former director of the CDC, thank you for joining us. And coming up, the battle lines over reopening school.
A little bit further to the left, as we just mentioned, you did get him to move up that timeline to commit to 100% clean electricity, but it's not the Green New Deal. You did get him to commit to a government-run public health care option, but it's not Medicare for all. So those were key campaign issues for you. Do you think these policies are enough for your backers to want to back Biden?
Well, given that the alternative is Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in the history of this country, I'm absolutely confident that those proposals are not only a significant step forward, but are going to win widespread support from the progressive community. What Joe Biden understands is that in order to win this election, and I'm going to do everything I can to see that he does win it, we're going to need a large voter turnout. And to get a large voter turnout, there has to be energy and excitement among younger people, among working class people, among people who very often do not vote for a variety of reasons. And I think what our task forces managed to do is to reach compromises which are going to bring a lot more excitement to a sector of the voting population that was less enthusiastic about Joe.
Can I ask you, Senator,
study on a U.S.-made vaccine. Again, very early. 45 people between the ages of 18 and 55, healthy people. They got this vaccine. They got 2 shots separated by about a month. And what they found was that they did seem to produce these antibodies, both neutralizing antibodies and what are known as binding antibodies. That's good. What we don't know still is just how much that's going to protect somebody. I mean, the ultimate question we're trying to ask, you give someone the vaccine, does it inoculate them, protect them from getting infected? And despite what this study has shown, that doesn't answer that question precisely. We need more phases of the study. And there are also some side effects, Aaron. In the sort of middle dose, which is probably going to be the dose that is used, people did get some what we call systemic side effects, muscle pain, fever, headaches, things like that. But they were short duration and not limiting in terms of having the trial go forward. So this is good news, Aaron. I mean, this is probably the bright spot in this, at least when it comes to vaccines and therapeutics. Still need more data. It doesn't mean that the vaccine's a guarantee by any means, but the trial moves forward for sure.
Well, we'll take that good news because, as a bright spot when you're looking at the possibility of the 1918 comparisons coming out of Dr. Fauci.
Right.
We'll take that bright spot, no matter how small it may be at this time. Thank you all three very much. And next, Florida reporting a record number of deaths, as one government official there says the governor has now lost control of the pandemic. Plus, the mayor of Atlanta is my guest. What does she think about the president's answer to a question about police violence against African Americans?
What a terrible question to ask. So are white people. More white people, by the way. More white people.
And the president's niece, Mary Trump, speaking publicly for the first time about what she wants the country to know about Donald Trump.
He's utterly incapable of leading this country. And it's dangerous to allow him to do so.